Uno is a card game created in 1971 by Look, okay, I know YouTuber video essay convention dictates I actually introduce the thing I'm going to spend however long talking about, but in this case I'm talking about a Japanese anime-styled PlayStation adaptation of a card game most of you are almost certainly already familiar with. You guys know what Uno is, right? We can all agree it's better if I skip that part. I know YouTube likes it when you make your videos like 3 hours long even if you only have 30 minutes worth of stuff to say, but this really seems unnecessary. Moving on. Right then. In 1998, budget game developers MediaQuest and Success released Uno for the PlayStation 1, exclusively in Japan. As development studios, there isn't really much of a story here. Both outfits pretty much exclusively specialized in low-budget games, and in their respective entire development catalogs, there's not much I would say stands out as being well-known. They made a tie-in PS2 game for a Japanese beefball chain once, so that's like, gotta be a mark of some pedigree. So unlike my previous videos discussing regionally exclusive games, which have been either more documentary or technical in nature, this one is really just me vibing and talking about some dumb thing I've spent too much time on. So what actually is interesting about PlayStation 1 Uno, Punchy? I hear you cry. Well, I mean, just look at this intro video. Uno, the sports anime, the video game. It's obviously a winning concept. And I am not kidding when I say sports anime. The main noteworthy thing about this game is that it contains an entire story mode with, like, text. A lot of text. The Uno lore runs extremely deep and shows no signs of stopping. The extremely basic premise is that you take on the role of Shinichi Uno. Yes, they really named him Uno. It's actually not that uncommon of a name in Japanese due to the phonology, but naming your character like that is definitely some... Okay, I'll stop talking now. He's a real excitable kind of guy, and he wants to take on all the members of his high school's dedicated Uno club to become the strongest Uno-er. Unoist? Uno... Anyway, and play in the National Uno High School Championship, a real thing that definitely exists. Dude, Hasbro couldn't even figure out support for competitive Scrabble, a game people actually like playing that way. You really think there's a tournament Uno circuit? This takes you on a journey all over the school in a somewhat RPG-esque fashion of generally nosing in on people's business and attempting to make everything about Uno as much as possible, because as is tradition for this sort of thing, the entire world revolves around a single card game. But before I really get stuck in the weeds on that, let me back up a bit, because the title of this video is kind of a lie, and so is how I introduced the game. Sorry, YouTube be like that. Uno isn't really a PS1 game, not originally anyway, having been released originally on the Sega Saturn under the name Uno DX, you know, like Deluxe. Like this is a premium game, which I find funny because it would be released on PS1 just a couple months later as Uno, and then again a year later under the Super Light 1500 branding, named so for being a line of budget games priced at 1500 yen, or about $15. At the time anyway. I know 100 yen to the dollar hasn't really been the case for a while now, but I still like that conversion factor, so I'm sticking with it. Bite me, economists. As far as I know from having looked through some footage online, the Saturn version is 100% the same as either PS1 version. I can't completely confirm that because I wasn't insane enough to actually purchase an entirely separate copy of an Uno game to play on my Japanese Sega Saturn that I'm sure we all just have. Wait, I actually do have one. This joke doesn't work, maybe you should cut this out, but feel free to leave a comment about how Saturn Uno actually features revolutionary new content if you happen to be more of an Uno scholar than me. So let's actually start playing the game. In order to get into the thick of it, you have to pick the somewhat unclearly labelled Advanced Uno from the menu to get into the story mode. The other options are all just varying flavours of free play. We're treated to a brief introduction, which I already summarised earlier. You are Uno, we love Uno, go play Uno. So we'll jump right to our first actual objective given to us by the Uno Club president over here, Chitose. She wants us to go round up the other members of the Uno Club because they're all off at school actually having an education, and we cannot have that, as we need to make everything be about a children's card game. We do this by picking their location on this map and defeating them in the game of Uno, as you might expect. Now, we don't actually know where they are on this map, or indeed where anyone you might need to find over the game's duration is, you just kind of have to guess, and there are indeed many optional and unnecessary battles you can take over the course of the game that will accomplish little but subject you to further Uno. Which all in all contributes to the surprising length of this game, given that it took me about 9 hours to complete it on my first go. That might not sound like a lot for an RPG-esque kind of game, but have you ever actually played 9 hours of Uno, like mostly in one sitting? It's not a very good idea. You'll start to see draw fours when you close your eyes. Anyway, moving to the library, we start our roundup with Hijiri. She's kind of the shy, reserved character who is unsubtly crushing on the lead boy over here. The characters are all very archetypal. If you've seen a sports anime at all, you can honestly probably guess the tone of these interactions without even needing to be able to read it. I think the game is charmingly earnest in its embrace of its stupid premise, but at the same time, this isn't Chihaya Furu. This is a pretty low-rent affair. And now, Uno. Yeah, so the first thing you might notice about Uno for PlayStation 1 is that this is perhaps the slowest simulation of Uno ever devised by human hands. Simply playing through your cards is astonishingly slow for no adequately disclosed reason, and it's magnified by all of the little animations and voice lines that play when special cards are used. These are, like, entertaining somehow, and kind of the main appeal of the game, because having dramatic voice lines for playing a draw 2 is pretty much the reason you would want to play anime Uno in the first place. But, like, it absolutely comes at the cost of the game being just incredibly slow. You need a lot of patience for PlayStation 1 Uno, which feels kind of at odds with the nature of Uno as, like, a game. But it's all worth it, because when you actually reach one card remaining, you can declare Uno and enter the State of Uno, accompanied with fancy full-screen animation and victory music. Ah, excellent. It's satisfying every time. You actually have to declare Uno manually with the square button before you do this, and the game will absolutely punish you if you forget, which is very funny, especially if you have to pick up a card, but the card you draw can be played immediately. You then have to remember to press square on the dialogue box that asks you if you want to play the card you just drew, so sometimes you just end up in Uno declaration loops. Mercifully, the game is sensible enough to not repeat the animation in the scenario, which is like the only abbreviation this game ever does for pacing, because there is otherwise no option to speed the game up in any way or abridge any of these animations. As for the rules, this is God's own plain-ass sex in the missionary position Uno. No extra house rules like draw 2 or 4 stacking, no playing multiple of the same number, no drawing until you have a valid card, because those aren't real rules, you absolute Uno heathens. I know who you are, watching this video thinking you actually know the rules to this game. Nobody actually knows the rules to this game, but everyone thinks they do. Well, Uno PS1 is here to set you all straight on the fundamentals. One rule I will actually explain, even though I said I didn't really want to explain how Uno works, because I've streamed this game multiple times and a surprisingly large portion of people apparently have no idea how this one works, is draw 4 challenging. When a draw 4 is played, it can be challenged, and if the person who played the draw 4 could have instead played a card that matched the colour of the previous card, the challenge is successful and they are forced to take their draw 4 back and draw 4 themselves. If the challenge is unsuccessful and they really did have no colours, you draw 6 instead. Note that it has to be a card of the same colour, not just any valid play. A matching number of a different colour is not a successful challenge, and neither is having another wild, because obviously that would make no sense if you had multiple draw 4s, right? If you already know the rules, you might think me insane for stressing this part, but seriously, loads of people do not know of or never fully understood this part, but it is essential for success in PlayStation 1 Uno, because the AI can and will bluff with draw 4s not infrequently, so it's worth knowing. So, got all that? Great. Now that you understand this rule properly, you can ruin your family game nights by causing arguments about this rule that you know everyone else inevitably won't know, even though it's part of the core rule set. And the only real opportunity for mind games that Uno actually presents, incidentally. I'm being serious about Uno here today, what else did you expect? So, back to it. We defeat Hijiri in the game of Uno and continue our roundup of the other 2 members of the Uno Club. Misa, the quirky glasses-wearing one, and Takami, the slightly abrasive rival-type character. These both also take the form of 1v1 Uno bouts, and this is where I will point out that the vast majority of PS1 Uno is 1v1 games, which might seem strange to you since Uno is a game I don't think most people play outside of group settings. But I honestly think this was done as a concession to the ungodly slow pace of the game, where adding even a single extra player makes the rounds take twice as long. Now, 1v1 Uno doesn't have that much strategy, but it does at least have slightly more than group Uno games, which are basically Calvin Ball. Your goal is to create a situation where you can combo your way to 0 with no opportunity for the opponent to respond, and you do need to somewhat pay attention to the order in which you play your cards to allow logical bridges between your colours. Obviously, there's only so much you can do. Uno remains mostly a luck-based game where you are at the whim of the draw, and sometimes you will just get absolutely steamrolled to death in miserable games where you get nothing and the AI represented by a schoolgirl laughs and calls you names while they play endless draw 2s, whittling down what little will left to live you may have had if your life has reached a low enough point to be playing anime simulations of Uno. But, generally speaking, you should be able to win more often than you don't because the AI isn't that good at playing 1v1 scenarios. There's no real penalty for losing a game either. You may have to repeat the bout until you eventually get a win and the story can progress, but there's no, like, game over state. You don't get sent to the Shadow Realm for losing or nothing. And furthermore, several story segments don't actually care whether or not you win or lose. However, right now, we have to win against the members of the Uno Club, so we do that and progress on to Chapter 2. This game is separated into 6 chapters, usually denoted by this inexplicable loading screen of a giraffe in his underwear. I have absolutely no idea why this is here. I have searched the apocryphal gospels and probably very confusing Japanese Google searches trying to figure out if this is some wordplay thing I don't understand as a relatively illiterate foreigner, but I've come up absolutely blank. There's just a giraffe in his underwear in this game, and you're all just going to have to live with that. Chapter 2 is literally just a single set against the club president Chitose, but this does present our first introduction to sets rather than single games because Chitose is fought in the form of a 3-game set, which is where I get to talk about the point system, because this is another core rule of Uno that nobody actually knows because nobody reads the rule sheet, but it's actually relevant here. Games are scored via a point system rather than win count, where you receive points equal to the value of everyone's remaining cards when you go out. A card is worth its face value, so a 9 is worth 9 points. Specials like Draw 2 and Skips are worth 20, Wilds are worth 50. This doesn't actually change how you play 1v1 matchups especially much because you still basically want to just combo your way to victory, but it does add the wrinkle that if you think you're about to lose and you can't stop it, you want to pitch your Wilds and Specials, combo potential be damned. The winner of a set in PS1 Uno is the person with the most points by the end, so winning a single game but claiming a low number of points is largely a wash. Albeit, of course, if you just win every game in the set, then who cares? This is why I didn't bother mentioning it before, because all games up to this point have been single game sets, so the points basically don't matter. Unless you somehow create the extremely rare scenario of going out against someone whose only card is a 0. I've never seen this happen, and I have no idea what the game would do if you did. So all of this doesn't exactly amount to much strategic depth added to the notoriously complex game of Uno, but it's something. Something to make me feel like I'm making intelligent decisions here while I play 9 hours of this stuff. I desperately need the stimulation. As an aside, I couldn't think of where to put this in the script, but someone's going to ask if I don't mention it, so reverses played in a 1v1 game just acts like a skip, according to PS1 Uno. Feel free to also debate whether or not this should work this way. Chapter 3 presents us with the much simpler goal to spread the joy of Uno all over the school, which is the game's excuse to introduce us to the tertiary cast of characters, and at this stage it doesn't actually even care if you win or lose the fights against these characters. So run around over campus and play Uno against everyone you meet. So who do we meet? Firstly, the twins, Yura and Sera. Yura's the redhead, Sera's the not redhead. This marks the first time you're asked to do a multi-man game in Uno PS1, and mercifully the game doesn't care if you win or lose this, but yep, it sure can take a while to play out, given the speed of this and all. Nevertheless, winning grants you a little scene where the two evangelize for the Uno Club, albeit with Sera being forced to wear a girl's outfit, which is funny because he's not a girl. 90s video games, isn't it? These scenes are actually missable. There's one like it per character in this chapter of the game, and whether or not you see it depends on whether you win or lose the corresponding bout. There's no, like, reward other than the scene itself, but do you really need a reward other than the deeper insight into the lore of PS1 Uno? I didn't think so. We also meet Jin, a tough and stern guy who's a member of the Public Morals Committee. I'm not sure how to translate this to English. I think Prefect would be good, but that's a bit British, I think. Like, have you played Danganronpa? You know the shouty guy, Ishimaru? It's that. He's like that. It's like literally the same thing, and they clearly struggle with what to call this in English too, because they translated the same thing to Ultimate Moral Compass. Okay, translation weirdness aside, I want to note at this point every game you play in this chapter is a 2-game set, which is how the game really starts dragging out its length, because win or lose, it takes a while to play multi-game sets. We also meet Urara, an English teacher, despite the fact you mainly find her in the infirmary, who is flirtatious with the male students. Thanks, I hate it. She does this when she gets Uno. Great! Moving on, and the final addition to the cast for now, Terumi. Terumi, the demon child. Looks can be deceiving, but this child is the most fearsome Uno warrior to walk the earth. I cannot, for the life of me, consistently win games against her. I don't actually know if the AI has different playing styles, but Terumi's feels more aggressive than the other characters, and that happens to be an effective strategy in 1v1, so I failed to defeat Terumi like 6 times. If you lose the initial 2-game set against a character in this chapter, the game has mercy on your retry and reduces it to 1 game, but it still nevertheless takes me a full hour and change to get a single game off the demon child and end this suffering. A serious low point for my playthrough. And we go from low to low, as clearing that puts us into Chapter 4, where Hijiri informs us that everyone has gone to the gymnasium to take part in the official school Uno tournament. The prize is a trip to Hawaii and 500,000 yen, which is like $4,000. God damn, I wish I could get 4,000 bucks for playing Uno. I paid like 20 bucks for this game. I actually lost money for playing Uno. How does that even happen to someone? What am I doing with myself? Anyway, we go to the gymnasium and... oh no. No. No, it's a 6-man game. Oh my god. Mercifully, you only have to play 1 round, but holy shit, playing a 6-man round in this game takes forever. This single game of Uno took 30 minutes straight of my real human life, and I didn't even win! Sarah absorbed his sister's life force to the tune of 250 points, instantly banishing her to the Uno Shadow Realm, from which she shall not return for the rest of the video. But fortunately for my sanity, it doesn't actually matter at all who wins this game, because the aftermath is that the school council president Shion is claimed as the winner, even though he didn't participate. This makes him very popular with the women, which I'm sure is how winners of real Uno tournaments are treated too. Very valid reason to lie about winning at Uno, so we largely let this go. This is the villain of our story, incidentally, even though he only appears like twice in the whole game. Chapter 5. Uno Club President Chitose is missing. Takami is taking this very well and demonstrates this by making this expression. This is my sleep paralysis demon, and it makes me draw 4. We will locate her by once again defeating the entire cast in a game of Uno. How this furthers your goals is very abstract, but what's actually important about this is that at this point in the game, the local rule has been enabled according to the loading screen. What's the local rule? Draw 2 stacking. Turns out I owe an apology for saying it's a fake rule, because here it is, and here it shall stay until the credits roll. I mainly feel like this just adds randomness to the proceedings, which I know, randomness in Uno, perish the thought. But it mainly just means that your kill combos sometimes don't kill. I don't know if there's actually, like, complex theory about the effects of draw 2 stacking from the doubtlessly passionate competitive Uno community, but personally, me not like local rule. Feel free to post your opinions on draw 2 stacking in the comments, and I will thoroughly consider all of them with the care they request and require. Anyway, heavily abridging about 2 hours of just solidly clowning on the cast again, we find Chitose in the gymnasium, who reveals she is going to travel to America for her studies, to which we selfishly question her attachment to Uno and demand to play against her to prove that she won't forget the spirit of Uno while she's abroad. We are a very good friend and have not, in fact, replaced our personality with telling someone to draw 4. Anyway, we play, we win, Chitose goes, yeah, I'm still going to America though, and we reply, okay, fair enough. And that's Chapter 5. So now we move on to the final chapter of the game, first exposited to us via this CG. I'm not even really sure what's going on here. Of Shion complaining that Uno is getting too popular at the school? So he's going to ban everyone at the school from playing it on his authority as the student council president? I don't know if student council presidents in Japan actually have that kind of authority, but have you ever been so incredibly inadequate that you felt personally upstaged by Uno? Like the concept of Uno? That's what this dude is going through, real mental anguish stuff. It's honestly heartrending. Thus, our goal for the final chapter is to track down the guy, beat him at Uno, which will somehow solve this problem of him not wanting to play Uno. Technically, we only need to play against the one guy to win this chapter, but this one throws a curveball in the fact that the guy actually moves around between locations at the school, and clicking on the wrong one will lock you into a bout against another character, or possibly even a pair. But upon winning, you'll be granted a hint as to where Shion has moved to, but I had success with just moving between the garden and the student council room, so go figure. Anyway, here he is, the final boss. The final boss takes the form of an absolutely exhausting 5-game set. 5 games. If you lose, that's probably a solid 40 minutes of your life straight in the toilet, and losing doesn't even knock games off the count if you then retry, so you really do just have to win this straight up. Worse still, I'm absolutely convinced this guy cheats. He sure seems to top deck draw 4s a lot. All in all, defeating Xion to claim ultimate Uno victory took me a solid 2 hours of Uno. Have you ever fought a single boss in an RPG for that long? Some of you probably have, but I think many of you should hopefully also recognize how outstandingly draining a single encounter of that length actually is, even when the game is something like Uno. It's at this point in the game, at this point in my life, I come to a realization, an epiphany, something I've never been more sure of in my life. I don't actually even like Uno. This card game sucks, man. All you do is play cards and get randomly fucked over sometimes. The strategy is borderline non-existent and mechanically it just upsets everyone, with long stretches where you don't get to play the game due to luck of the draw, or getting piles of shit heaped on you via special cards. Miserable game. I don't think I could make a card game more purposely frustrating if I tried. I am sick of Uno at this point, and after I'm done with this, I'm going to my local toy shop and I'm gonna burn every single pack of Uno cards I can oh, I won. Uno's not that bad. So on my, 5th attempt at this set, I dunk this dude's head in the toilet, steal his lunch money, and call his mother unkind things as I take him down 4 games to 1 with an end victory of 112 points. We triumphantly declare victory as Xion realizes that Uno is kind of fun, actually. No, it isn't. This is a profound lie. And thus rescinds his attempt to ban the game as we assert that this is the fun of Uno, the #1 card game! And peace is returned to the school. We get a little flash forward in the ending revealing that Chitose won an Uno tournament in California, and for some reason it's very humorous to me that this would be in a newspaper, and also that it would just be printed like, Japanese girl, win, in all caps like that, like if every newspaper headline was a variant on Florida Man. The Uno Club, now assured that the future of worldwide Uno is in good hands, looks towards the future. The end. And that was PlayStation 1 Uno. The main appeal of this game definitely lies in its presentation and goofy dialogue, which is somewhat lost on a non-Japanese speaking audience. The game is certainly playable without speaking the language. This is hardly an experts-only dealio, it's just Uno after all. Even if you really can't understand a word of it, wandering around and winning games of Uno will eventually give birth to story progress, but there's a surprising amount of optional bouts, so it'll probably take you about twice as long to get through if you forego any comprehension of the text. But without the charm and audacity of attempting to adapt Uno into a 9-hour video game version of a sports anime, what you have is just 9 hours of Uno. And 9 hours of Uno is fucking exhausting. I may hate Uno now, but at least the game is still kind of a charming PS1 one-off oddity. Why? Yeah, there's a sequel. On the PS2, no less. Made by the same dev studio and everything, so a true blue sequel from the same genius minds. Probably. I didn't actually check the credits, and I'm going to continue to pointedly not do that. Now, I'm not going to spend as much time talking about this one because it's not as elaborate as its predecessor, but it does have a story mode with a cast of general anime archetypes, albeit I'm not going to cover all of them because the plot is pretty thin here. Unlike the previous game, you are not playing as a fixed character, you are a silent protagonist whose name you get to pick. The premise of PlayStation 2 Uno is just, there is a tournament being held at your school and people want to win the tournament. That's it, that's kind of all you get. This doesn't change or evolve, it's just a straight series of games in the form of a kind of round-robin knockout type thing until only one player remains and is crowned the winner. I'm not actually sure how to describe the format of this tournament because I've never seen anything like it, but remember that point system I talked about in PlayStation 1 Uno? Well, now it's incredibly important to understand it, because the way PS2 Uno works is that every character, including you, has 3 lives. If a game ends and you have the worst score, as in your remaining cards have the highest value when someone wins, you lose a life. Games in PS2 Uno are almost all 5-man games rather than the heavy 1v1 focus that PS1 Uno had until enough characters get knocked out to start reducing the player count. This immediately changes the general strategy from trying to produce unstoppable combos because you can't really do that kind of thing in multi-man games, to reducing the value of your hand at all costs. The name of the game is pure last place avoidance, like you're channeling the essence of online mahjong. Just throw your special cards out as early as possible. It's nice if you can win, because then obviously it's impossible to be last, but it is quite possible, and honestly not even very unlikely, to make significant headway into the tournament without winning a single round. You don't have to win, you just have to not be last. Strictly speaking, you only need to win a single game to complete the story mode of PS2 Uno, the last one, when it gets down to being a 1v1. Something that's kind of annoying about this format is that the only player who plays in every single game is, well, you, the player. When a character loses a life from being last, they're cycled out for another character for a bit, and there's a lot more characters than the 4 you're playing against at any given time, but when you lose, you don't sit out for 3 rounds while everyone else plays and loses lives. This means the odds are not really with you for getting through without needing to save and load, because while all you have to do is avoid last, as we've hopefully become aware by now, Uno is bullshit, and sometimes you lose for no reason, and it's very difficult to avoid being last over the course of the approximately 30-ish or so games you need to play to finish this one. 30 games might sound like a lot, and it kinda is, but fortunately this game plays a hell of a lot faster than PS1 Uno does. Playing cards is just faster, characters don't talk as much when playing special, so you can get through this game in a trim 2 hours or so. There's also no real story to speak of. The only thing breaking up the Uno games is brief snippets of dialogue when characters cycle in or out, and these are all just a couple of fluff lines for vibes. Like, it's charming, but there's nothing really going on here, if you get my gist. Speaking of characters, let's go over a handful real quick. We got Afro Guy, like literally his name is Afro, they just wrote it in kanji. Martial Arts Guy, who's really annoying to play against because his voice lines take like twice as long as everyone else. Guy who would clearly be the protagonist under different circumstances. A couple variety of Schoolgirl, and the Demon Child. It's not literally the same character, but as if they knew the legacy, they named her Uno Hime. As in, Uno Princess, for the people in the cheap seats. They knew she was the most powerful, and her reign continues here undeterred. I respect the Demon Child, but I also fear her. Winning the tournament simply gets you some dialogue and an end text scroll that's like, "You did it! You're the Uno champion! Congratulations! You're the strongest battler!" It's, a bit low rent. To be expected, since this game released under the super light budget line of games also, but somehow everything feels less grand than Uno PS1, which as I sit here writing this, I'm really wondering what the hell I'm talking about, and I really think I need to stop. This seems like as good a place as any for that. So those were the weird Uno games for PlayStation. Why did I spend this long making a video about Uno? I don't know. Why did you spend this long watching it? But if you are still watching this far, thanks for enjoying this minor spiral into insanity, and consider subscribing to the channel and checking out my Patreon to support production, because some of these import games are kinda hard to get and Patreon helps with that. I actually had a surprisingly difficult time sourcing a copy of PS2 Uno. Like, it wasn't expensive per se, but I had to proxy ship it. Like, nobody was selling the damn thing other than like 2 people on Rakuten, so I ate more in shipping fees than I'm willing to admit to get it. So please support the channel in whatever way you find convenient to facilitate idiotic dalliances like that. Thanks again for watching. I hope to see you all next time. Hopefully on something that has nothing to do with Uno. Ciao!